All right. Back in the swing of things. Let's get into it.
50 years ago, they were saying, well, from a naturalistic perspective, we have to be descended from 1 million individuals. Then the number dropped to 100,000.
Hmm.
Francis Collins in his book said 10,000. Fuzz Rana, my colleague, when he debated Dennis Venema, Dennis said 1,200. Then I heard the number 800. When I debated the president of BioLogos,
Yeah, so that's not how evolution works. We didn't descend from a specific, couple of individuals who exclusively evolved into humans and then they made all the rest of the humans. That's not how evolution works. Evolution is populations of creatures changing over time. And I guarantee you there were more than 130 evolving at a time into humans. Um, you can't, because I'm going to say this because I have a feeling he's going to misunderstand something else that scientists also say. Like, for instance, all of the people who have blue eyes have one specific ancestor in common that had that first mutation for blue eyes. And yes, all of them, all of, I have blue eyes, all of us, and green eyes as well, all of us descend from that one person. But that doesn't mean that there aren't other people who we descend from, right? I want to get that out of there at the beginning. Because, yes, we all descend from that one person, but we also descend from tons of other people as well.
she said we could go as low as 130. And I'm saying, let's plot a graph. It seems like we're heading down towards the biblical two.
Yeah, but once again, I have said this a lot on my channel. If two people were to be the only people to give rise to the entire race, that's a whole lot of incest, and that's a whole lot of excess mutation that will more than likely completely just curb stomp the entire race before it even gets going. That's how that works, dude. The I don't know if anybody else knows about this, but there was so much incest going on in the empires over in Europe that there is actually a specific prince who was known for being, pardon the pun, royally fucked up because of just the amount of mutations that he accrued from all of that incest. And like you need genetic variation for a species to continue living. It's a necessity.
Moreover,
Hmm.
what we now recognize is that you can't use the genetic diversity of a mammalian species to determine the ancestral population. And they've done field studies on this.
Wait.
The genetic diversity of a mammalian species to determine the ancestral population.
Yeah, ancestral population is bullshit. That's not a thing. There's no first population of humans. You might say that as, like, what was the first population that is considered inside of the box that we label humanity, right? But all of those beings were also descended from creatures who were outside of that box as well. There's no such thing as an ancestral population as this guy is describing it.
And they've done field studies on this, where they'll put, say, a pair of sheep on an island where no mammals exist at all. They look at their genetics, and then they come back many years later and look at the genetics of, say, 10 generations of offspring. And what they discover, you get way more genetic diversity.
Yeah, because of the excess mutations due to incest, which will very, very easily kill off the entire race. There are good mutations, there are meh mutations, and there are bad mutations. The more mutations in one person, in one being, the more chance that there are bad mutations. Obviously, there's more of a chance for good mutations, but those bad mutations, oh man, those bad mutations, they will kill off anything.
From those two sheep than you'd expect from any of the mathematical genetics models, which tells me those models are mathematically too simple. And genetics is a complicated discipline. I'm not surprised by that. But what they have
Except you seem to be completely ignoring it.
discovered is you get the greatest departure where you have a mammal species with a long generation time, meaning a long time between being born and being able to reproduce. Well, guess what? We human beings have the longest, or near the longest, generation time. And therefore, we would expect
Yeah, which is a whole lot of time to die before that happens.
the greatest departure. Bottom line, there isn't a genetic challenge to all of us being descended from Adam and Eve.
Yes, there is, dude. Yes, there is.
With one proviso, we can't put Adam and Eve as recent as 6,000 years ago. In fact, I would argue, based on what we see in Genesis 2, with these four rivers coming together in the Garden of Eden, that can only happen when sea levels are about 200 feet lower than they are today, which implies that the Garden of Eden event happened during an ice age. So it's not 6,000 or 10,000 years ago. It's probably
I this horrible amalgamation of science in the Bible is just so bad. It's so bad because he's just picking out fucking buzzwords and random theories of science and just including them for no other reason than he fucking wants to.
in the neighborhood of 50,000 to 150,000 years ago.
And here we go. Now he's saying that somehow 50,000 years had passed when pretty much everyone agrees that, like, in the Bible, there's only like 6 to 10,000 years. Basically, you know what that means? If he's agreeing that it must have been 50,000 years, you know what that means? The Bible is wrong, and yet he's still fucking clinging to it.
Ago, which is right in line with even the naturalistic genetic models.
Funny because the title is New Genesis Research Confirms the Bible. You literally just proved how it doesn't prove the Bible and how it actually refutes the Bible.
Of how far back in time you have to go to get us descended from one man and one woman. So that's one example.
Now, for a person who hears that and that makes sense to them, but they have read the first few chapters of Genesis and they remember it describing a different timeline, a different series of events, can you kind of help walk through your interpretation of how you would reconcile these two or
Basically, how do you excuse the bullshit without calling it bullshit? Is what he's saying.
sort of realms, the sort of the scientific genetic realm that you're talking about, and
right?
then the description given in the Bible?
Well, a lot of theologians are saying we can no longer scientifically defend the creation accounts of Genesis 1 and Genesis
Oh boy, could that possibly be because it's fucking wrong?
2. My response is, well, you can't if you use your interpretive approach. But if we use the biblical testing method, aka the scientific method, it can be done. So,
Nope.
step 1 of the scientific method, don't interpret until you first establish the frame of reference or the point of view. Well, in Genesis 1:1, that reference frame is the universe. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The heavens and the earth is an ancient Hebrew idiom that refers to the entire universe. They did
Um, huh. So, you realize that they didn't understand what the universe was back then, right? It took, as far as I remember, until the AD part of the timeline, that's after death, for people to figure out that the Earth is a globe and that it's heliocentric. So, where the fuck are you getting that from?
didn't have a word for universe. They used that phrase instead. But when you go to Genesis 1:2, the frame of reference has changed from the universe to the surface of the earth. The Spirit of God is hovering over the surface of the waters of planet Earth. Now, step 2 of that scientific method, don't interpret until you also establish the starting conditions. Well, Genesis 1:2 states that for us. The Spirit of God was hovering on the surface of the waters of planet Earth, and it was dark on the surface of the waters,
Trying to make sure there's not 30 seconds.
and the water covered the whole surface of the earth, and the earth was empty of life and unfit for life. And you get a good parallel in Job 38, where it explains why it was dark on the surface of the waters, how God had blanketed the earth with clouds that kept the seas dark. And we know that the primordial earth had an atmosphere 200 times thicker than it has today. That atmosphere would not let any visible light get through to the surface of the earth.
He still hasn't made, like, any assertions. I have nothing to say here.
But creation day 1, it says, let there be light. And we now know there was a collision event between the early Earth and a fifth rocky planet, Theia, and that collision event stripped almost all the water and atmosphere from the primordial Earth. That now allowed light to get through to the surface of the waters. And
Okay, still nothing. Like, dude, when are you gonna get to your fucking point?
you can go step by step through 2. That's about the water cycle. Day 3, continents appear for the first time. And we know that that collision event between those two rocky planets.
Yeah, so there's absolutely no evidence that, like, what he's saying is true of what's in the Bible, because I want to remind you all that the Bible's orders of what happened are complete bullshit. He said, let there be light before he created the stars. How is there any light without the stars? How is there any collision of planets without the stars? It requires stars to be formed for planets to be formed. It's bullshit.
It gave Earth powerful plate tectonics, and those tectonics would have made the continents. You would have had life proliferating in the continents. Then the atmosphere goes.
I'm sorry, the From what I understand, plate tectonics were not started, and neither do they exist because of the collision that happened between our planet and a different planet. That didn't happen because of that. The plate tectonics happen because the crust of the Earth sits upon parts of the Earth that are liquid, and they are vortexes. That's why that happens, because they sit upon a part of the Earth that is molten, and the flow of that molten Earth moves around the plates on top.
Transparent on the fourth day. We know why, because the life that God created pumped oxygen in the atmosphere, and that cleared out the haze and allowed animals on the surface of the earth to actually see.
I'd like to point out that for literally all of this, God doesn't need to be part of the explanation, because all of this is explained by simply the universe existing and things in the universe existing and doing their own thing. Why the hell does God need to be a part of this explanation at all? God didn't do that.
See the sun, moon, and stars in the sky. Bottom line, following that biblical testing method, you see that Genesis 1's description of the creation events, everything is in the correct chronological order, and everything is correctly described with respect to the well-established scientific record.
No, it is not. Once again, prime example. God says, "Let there be light," and it says God created the heaven and the earth before stars are made in the biblical account. He's just conveniently left out the fact that that's not in the right order and is going, "Trust me, bro, it's in the same order as the scientific account of what happened."
Then you get into Genesis 2. And what I've been noticing, these theologians see that as a recasting. I don't see it that way. I look at Genesis 1 as focusing on the physical aspects of creation. Genesis 2 focuses on the spiritual aspects. What's happening in Genesis 2, God is introducing Adam first to the physical creation, then the soulish creation, and last of all the spiritual creation, and instructing them how he's going to be able to manage it, because that's what God said.
Okay, then why doesn't he present it in the same order that it supposedly happened? Because Genesis 1 and 2 have different orders of how the shit happens. Why? What is the point of scrambling around what happened and then explaining it to Adam? How does that make any sense?
In Genesis 1, he gave humans a mandate to manage the resources of the planet for their benefit and the benefit of all life.
That is really interesting. I wanna make sure I am
Interesting, huh? More like bullshit.
understanding how these different pieces fit together. So when you're talking about, I love what you said. That if you were to plot it on a chart, you see us getting closer to 2. So I think that that's really interesting, and I want to understand your
Interesting and wrong.
view though. Are those two made ex nihilo, or do you see them as you're nodding your head? So yes, Adam and Eve were made ex nihilo.
Yes, and what you see in
What
Genesis,
does that even mean? I'm sorry, but ex nihilo is just a name of a Minecraft mod to me. Ex nihilo meaning. This does not fucking explain anything. The definition, oh, out of nothing. Okay. Okay, that makes sense. I was looking at the quote here. That's it used in a sentence. Okay.
One is it uses two verbs to describe God bringing into existence human beings. He made them and he created them. Asa and bara. The verb asa, manufacture, means that God personally took the dust of the earth and made the physical bodies of Adam and Eve. But it also used the words bara, which means to create something brand new that did not exist before.
Okay, that does not mean out of nothing in any sense. Create and create something new does not mean at all created from nothing. That's not, that's not a, they're not equivalents at all.
And he breathed into them his spirit. And so we humans became not just a physical body, not just a body with mind, will, and emotions that we share with birds and mammals that the Genesis 1 talks about on creation day 5, is that he made us spirit beings, which means
Why is it not testable? Why, when you look at the brains of humans and animals, other animals, because humans are animals, why, when you look at the brain of a fucking squirrel and the brain of a human, why do they work exactly the same? If we have that little bit extra, why do they work the same?
that we're able to communicate with the Creator himself. Notice that the birds and mammals, they're designed to communicate to a higher species, namely us human beings. God designed us likewise so we could communicate to a higher being, namely God himself, but we're the only species on earth that has that capacity.
Where is your evidence of this other than in Scripture?
And even from an atheistic perspective, notice that humans are the only species that has ever existed on earth that asks the question, is there a God? Can I relate?
Have you ever thought of the fact that maybe that's because you don't understand the other creatures on the earth? They could be asking the same thing. My cat could be asking the same thing in his stupid little meows. You ever thought about that?
To that God? Is there meaning beyond my life here on earth? I mean, I've got a very intelligent dog. That dog never addresses those philosophical issues.
How do you know he doesn't? How do you know he isn't thinking about exactly that?
Yeah, exactly. I love, I think it's G.K. Chesterton who noted that we would never read a 12-part series on cow, like cow pastures and cow behaviors because there's no story. They just eat grass, procreate, walk.
You realize that people make entire careers out of stuff like that, right? You realize there are scientists called zoologists whose entire job it is to understand the behavior of animals. This guy's really fucking daft, isn't he?
Walk around. There's no will, there's no overcoming, there's no questioning, there's no story. It's just
How do you know that? You're just saying it doesn't happen without any reason that it doesn't happen other than, I don't think it happens.
cows on a plot of land,
Yeah,
which is, I think,
you don't see a bunch of cows gathering together around their food tray and
They gather around their food trays.
discussing philosophy.
They moo. How do you know they're not discussing philosophy?
exactly, exactly.
If you like these kind of videos,
Okay, if these people saw just like a bunch of people from a different country gathering around the water cooler and speaking a different language, do you think they would go, oh, they're not talking about anything? Like, the only reason you think that is because you don't have any concept of understanding the fact that you just don't understand what they're saying. You just don't understand what they're saying. They could be talking about something, but you don't know that. But all you're saying is, no, they couldn't be talking. You're hearing noises come out of their mouths. Who's to say that's not their language? You can't definitively say yes or no because you don't fucking know. Anyways, I'm not gonna let them do their outro, so I'm gonna do mine. If you keep coming back, subscribe. If this is your first time, I don't give a shit.